Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. As always, I'm worried how OBS actually works after not having streamed for a couple of days or almost 2 weeks at this point. I was waiting for some big news, and a lot of stuff has happened thus far. I didn't know how to combine it in one video or make several streams because I definitely plan to cover a lot next week, because obviously this is when the iPad event actually happens. This is where we get to analyze the differences between iPad Air, iPad Pro, the pricing, everything else. So next week I'm also getting my play button. It's in the mail, so let's see when I actually finally receive it. I hope that it will be at that point behind me or in front of me. I might be cuddling it like a security blanket. We have our first chatter. Hi. This is sort of my plan for next week. It's a little bit hard to predict exactly what I'm doing beyond the reaction stream. As you all know, when it comes to Apple reaction streams, I obviously cannot react to the actual video, but I can react live, so that you can just turn the event on simultaneously and look at my silly faces if that you feel like doing that. Malti, hi. I don't think I've seen you here ever or in a while. Welcome to the stream, man. We have people starting to tune in. Welcome. This is sort of a recap of everything we know before we get into the actual Apple event. I apologize for not having been here for a little bit. I've been busy. I've been busy today, so I didn't even know that I would be able to stream. But yeah, I am motivated. I am super pumped for the event, and let's see what we actually get out of it. Now, as for what has happened since I've been gone, well, Apple is doomed, apparently, and then their stock went up 7%. Apple had their Q2 2024 earnings announcement. Now, this is sort of dry, but once we are talking about crazy numbers like Apple is delivering in terms of finances, then there really is nothing dry about it, right? Because the numbers are just so huge. But I'm not a financial investor in Apple anymore. I used to be. I made a little bit of profit with Apple stock, but since I am doing an Apple focused channel, I do maintain the idea that I shouldn't be invested in Apple directly. I'm already invested in their products and kind of stuff like that, and obviously my channel depends on their survival, for example, but yeah, I don't want to be financially tied to Apple in that degree. However, I definitely wish I had invested before this, because Apple beat expectations. They were rather subdued. Around $93 billion were expected. They came to around $95 billion. So, the percentage difference is obviously not that big once we are talking about crazy huge numbers like that. And Apple's profit margins is basically close to all-time highs, like what we saw around 2010 when the iPhone 4 dominated their lineups, and they had very little else to sell, right? Because after that, the iPad joined the fray and stuff like that. So they had huge earnings per share, 1.52. I believe that's a record for a March quarter. They made $24 billion in profit. Now, iPhone revenue shrank to $51.3 billion. This is down for Apple because Apple makes way too much money on iPhone, but service revenue was basically at an all-time high, definitely a high for the March quarter, so it made up for it for the most part. It is basically a 2% decline in revenue year to year, but most investors expected a far greater decline because obviously the iPhone declined by 20%. Yeah, so the numbers in of itself are not that important. I personally think that they're so huge, their tax rate is effectively so low and stuff like that, that they will survive, believe me. And they just announced a $110 billion stock buyback program, the largest in US history, and therefore the largest in the world's history, because Americans like it large. So yeah, there's a lot of impressive stuff here. I do want to remind people briefly that when we talk about Apple's crazy profit margins, we are talking at around 45%. Obviously, you have to account for some of the spending there and stuff like that. When you actually look at Microsoft and Google, you will find that their profitability is pretty similar to Apple, but on a much, much lower revenue basis. So those software companies actually have like crazy, like 70% profit margins. So if you ever believe that your iPhone is expensive, wonder what Office 365 or your Windows 11 stuff should cost if it was weighted fairly. And Apple does enjoy similar margins for their services, especially for stuff like the App Store business and iCloud storage, but then Apple also has far less profitable business services like Apple Music, for example, Apple TV Plus, Apple Arcade. They unfortunately don't disclose how profitable or not every individual service is, but we know that their overall services are very, very successful. And this is partially why we have so many regulations being written up when it comes to the Digital Markets app in Europe. The US is also thinking of maybe regulating Apple further, and their 30% commission from the App Store. Countries like Japan and India working on legislations. I will cover them. I did start covering like the Digital Markets app on this channel, but so much has changed thus far that it honestly felt kind of dishonest to say anything about it until we just know more. And there have been some recent changes to like the core technology fee and to the fact that the iPad was also designated as a gatekeeper, similar to the iPhone. So there's been a lot of stuff changing, and maybe a week or two later, like after everything has sat down with the iPad event, maybe I'll cover that in the stream too. So Apple's finances are doing rather well, and their stock bounced back to around $2.9 trillion. So quite a successful company. And definitely not doomed, but it's still fun to make the Apple is doomed jokes whenever something like this comes up, when like revenue drops by 2% and it's still like $95 billion or something. It's funny. And by the way, like even on a 6-month basis, Apple is still up year over year. So don't let people tell you that Apple is on some kind of like long-term like decline trajectory. That simply wouldn't be true. Now, we have talked at length about iPads, and for those of you who are here, for those of you who are watching, please, if you feel like commenting, if you want to let me know what you think about any of the topics I talk about, or if you want to like request a topic, I'm always open for suggestions, for constructive criticism, for stuff like that. And of course, if you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, like, share, and if you feel like supporting this channel directly while I'm live, you can send a super chat or a super sticker, and once the video has already been up, there is still a chance for you to support me long term, and that is, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel. But I will obviously mention all of that again during the Apple event, when our viewership will be probably 10 times higher than what it is right now, because that's kind of how it works in the world of tech streaming. Malti, did you know that new emulator called Provenance is coming to the App Store? Yes, it's like a PlayStation emulator, some other older systems, I believe Sega Genesis and stuff like that. It's basically part of Apple's rule changes. Now, there are some emulators that we won't see on the App Store because they require like not necessarily deeper system access, but like changes. Like we won't be probably seeing Dolphin because in order for it to not hit like a super hard like performance penalty, it needs specific code that Apple does not allow on the App Store in the current state. But stuff like provenance for relatively old systems, yes, that is definitely coming to the App Store. I hope that it's also coming to the European Union App Store, because unfortunately we didn't get Delta here in Europe on the actual App Store. You have to go through the alt store. You have to download basically a separate marketplace that is part of the Digital Markets app, guys. However, some of that stuff will improve. I had criticized, for example, that obviously if I buy access to the alt store and then download Delta, that's all fine and good for my iPhone, but that doesn't benefit my iPad one bit. So it sucks that Delta isn't on the App Store where it would be on my iPad. And now we know that thanks to the Digital Markets app, thanks to the European Union, by around iOS 18, the iPad will also be included. And for example, for an emulator like Provenance that has like pretty widescreen systems or like some of the early widescreen systems in there, I definitely appreciate it also being on the iPad, simply because the iPad had such a larger screen. And I also heard that the developer is even working on a tvOS app, which is absolutely phenomenal. And they're currently doing like test flight early access to that. And yeah, they plan to release it only by the time they have it ready across iPhone, iPad, and Apple TV, which is absolutely phenomenal. Like I 100% applaud developers. Like this is exactly why I've advocated time and time again for the App Store to be a little bit more open, a little bit more inclusive of like enthusiast applications like emulators, because you will see support coming in. Unfortunately, that's not support that will generate Apple any extra money, but it definitely makes me way more likely to stick with iPhone, stick with iPad, stick with Apple TV, enjoy the cohesive ecosystem, enjoy the great optimization that many developers are providing thanks to like the unified like Metal API across those systems and stuff like that. So definitely a lot of positive stuff. By the way, guys, I apologize, my voice, I'm not sick or anything, but it's a little weak today for some reason. I guess I'll just come a little closer to the microphone. So, we have sufficiently warmed up, in my opinion. Let's talk Mark Gurman. I've waited for this Power On newsletter for the last week because I was like, well, at some point Mark Gurman has to do like a last minute leak. And he sort of did by like not denying his prior leaks, which if you know Mark Gurman, that's kind of very often the case. But we are basically getting a confirmation of Mark's older leaks here. We are getting a big tirade in the beginning against like the iPad in general, I believe, where he like suggests that, well, it's better off if like as like a MacBook, like not replacement, because that's what it already is for many people, but that it should be more like a MacBook, right? He is one of those guys that denies the benefits of the iPad being like very purpose built for a primarily multi-touch environment where every app, every system feature and stuff like that has to work well through that. He's more of a like connect a Magic Keyboard to it guy, and then benefit from it having a touchscreen and Apple Pencil support, and then basically let it kill, for example, the iPad Air. So he writes, when it I'm sorry, I briefly switched to to OBS. But when it comes to turning the iPad into a computer replacement, Apple has lost its way. The device still lacks the multitasking abilities of a laptop. Yes, that's kind of the point. It's a smaller screen. It's a device with like lower battery capacity, lower cooling capacity. Okay. And it has less of an advantage over regular smartphones. I guess if you like say that like Android and you have like stuff like Samsung DeX, maybe I don't agree with that, but because simply I believe that just the form factor makes it inherently a big advantage almost by definition. But I mean, it's his opinion, he is entitled to it. Apple has taken steps towards making the iPad more effective, but they've been half measures. The first iPad Pro, this is the first iPad Pro I have owned because I really, really loved that thing. I was known in university as the guy with the huge iPad. I got it in white. I absolutely loved it. It was released in late 2015, offered bigger screens and an attachable keyboard case. The case was improved a bit with the 2018 iPad Pro. Wait, what? The Magic Keyboard was a huge... Oh, he means, the keyboard itself was better in 2018, but the 2018 iPad Pro also later had compatibility with the 2020 Magic Keyboard. Okay, I kind of thought that Mark Gurman had gone insane for a second, and that made me go insane. So we got the big leap forward with the Magic Keyboard, which is actually interesting because the Magic Keyboard and the 2020 iPad Pro, which was the A12Z version versus 2018 A12X iPad Pro. That one came like right before WWDC and introduced like interesting features. And we also around that time got like the split of like iOS and iPadOS. So those were like 2 big years, like 2 to 4 big years if you count from like the redesign in 2018 for the iPad and its OS. We got everything for like better support for USB accessories and things like that. So yeah, there was quite a lot happening at that time. Obviously, Magic Keyboard comes with a trackpad that required the software support to come in for cursor-based navigation. People were a little bit like iffy because it wasn't like your traditional cursor, but it's more like a floating circle and then it attaches to certain things. I always turn that off, but in my opinion, it's still a cool and new idea. Still, none of these advances made it feel like you no longer needed a laptop. It depends. I didn't own a laptop again until like late 2021 with the M1 Max MacBook Pro that is sitting right before me. Before that, I had a late 2012 iMac, and I just kept on updating my iPads in between. I got like the original iPad, the iPad 2, the iPad Air, and then the 2015 iPad Pro, and then later the M1 iPad Pro. So yeah, I'm basically on my productivity devices. I'm fully on the M1 generation. M1 in my iPad Pro, M1 Max in my MacBook Pro. So I bought the MacBook specifically more for like use cases like this because I fully admit that there are features missing in iPadOS, and I do believe that needs to be rectified. Like I should be able to stream with my iPad and stuff like that. There should be support for things like OBS. I also believe the iPad is far more in need of support for side loading than the iPhone ever was, simply because of how enthusiast developers work and stuff like that. So yeah, in my opinion, the iPad is in a good spot. It's not perfect, but this idea that it needs to basically turn into like a laptop, you guys know all the Craig Federighi meme where he's like, are we merging iPads and Macs, iPadOS and macOS? And like the big like slide comes in, no. Right, and I still fundamentally agree with this. While I do believe that iPad needs to learn from Mac and Mac needs to learn from iPad, this is, for example, how we got Stage Manager on macOS, which I absolutely enjoy using. I disagree here with his statement on this. 2 years ago, Apple introduced Stage Manager. This is why I'm saying it's like a big 4 years, from 2018 iPad Pro to like 2022, aiming to make the iPad better at multitasking. This optional feature allowed users to spread application windows around, but it was so unintuitive that Apple was forced to make changes. I still maintain, and Apple has improved it, that Stage Manager or any kind of like many app multitasking is just inherently unsuited to, for one, anything lower than like 13 inches in my opinion. Even on an 11-inch iPad Pro, I probably wouldn't want to use like more than 2 apps at once. But especially once we start talking multitasking and we start talking about like input, like little slits, little dots where you like interact and change like window sizes and move them around. In my opinion, the problem becomes that I believe that no user interface is truly great for that. Like for me, Stage Manager is still wildly superior as like a multi-touch input method than whatever Windows 11 does on their tablets, right? However, because people just expect a Windows 11 device or even a Windows tablet like a Surface tablet to basically always be connected to keyboard and mouse. They don't feel those disadvantages, and Apple tried to create a solution specifically more designed towards multi-touch, and they hit like very traditional, very expected roadblocks in that area. Guys, let me know, do you actually agree with this? Am I completely insane for thinking those things? Do you just believe, like Mark Gurman, that the iPad needs to run macOS? Like Drew from Telosive Tech, for example, is known for like that he basically gave up on his love for iPad, despite not too long ago calling iPad like the best Apple product in the lineup. So let me know if there's anything crazy here for you, or against you, however you want to see it. The delayed version of iPadOS that included the feature by a month. So whatever. It was an ambitious undertaking. Apple was trying to reinvent multitasking for people who may have never used a Mac, but it didn't make it better. It also didn't make anything worse or whatever. Like, it's objectively still better to have an extra feature like that than not have it. But okay, Mark Gurman. More recently, Apple has given the iPad a boost by equipping it with Mac level chips. So M1 in the iPad Pro in 2021. That's the iPad I have right next to me, reading my comments during the live stream and checking whether the stream works fine, which it looks quite fine to me. Mark Gurman says the M1 is basically like a rebranded A14X. I agree with that for the most part. There's some Mac specific things in it, but yeah, mostly it's just a better A12X, kind of what you would have expected to happen. But advertising the iPad as having Make capabilities goes a long way with customers and developers. So basically the idea is the chip is powerful, you can advertise like Mac performance, but does it actually deliver Mac capabilities? And Mark asks for Apple to take a stand. Not this Mark Gurman. Does it want the iPad to be a half-baked laptop alternative? Oh my god, this is such a misunderstanding of what the iPad is to be about. Or real computing replacement. Yeah, no computing is computing unless it runs like 5 instances of Xcode simultaneously. Consumers are confused about why they should buy an iPad versus a Mac, and vice versa. Well, hopefully Apple probably wants you to buy both, kind of like what I did. But then again, I did kind of need 2 devices. I probably would have purchased like a less premium iPad if the iPad Pro didn't exist. So it's not like Apple forced me to get, well, at that time there wasn't like an M1 iPad Air when I bought it, but now I have like 2 mini LED screen devices, 2 devices that I know have roughly the same like single core performance, so I know how quickly apps boot up. This is why I can use my iPad and my Macs simultaneously pretty well, which guys, I understand that not everybody wants to spend as much money on that. The problem though becomes like, it's still a different form factor. Like giving a Mac a touch screen, or especially like a support for the Apple Pencil, doesn't really work unless you make it like convertible. And giving the iPad like a user interface that is like permanently dependent on keyboard and mouse would just take away from a lot of its core appeals. Like even the way the Magic Keyboard is designed, you just plop it in, you just connect it to the magnets, you quickly disconnect it. You get all the benefits basically of the iPad being easily to connect to a keyboard and mouse, but you then take it off and it's just like a naked tablet. It's super lightweight, it's super thin. We'll talk about like what to expect with like the upcoming iPad Pros. And yeah, so in my opinion, Apple still definitely wants you to like respect the Steve Jobs idea of the iPad, where it's like it's a magical piece of glass that you interact directly with your fingers, and basically the UI is the device, right? The thinner the bezels get, obviously, the more you focus on the immersion of the content on the screen. There's nothing between you and the operating system. It's just you tapping your finger, and this is why Apple holds on to it. Not just because Steve believed in that, but I believe that the engineers who have created the iPad absolutely still believe that the iPad should stand separate. That does not mean the iPad cannot learn from the Mac. That does not even mean that iPad and Mac cannot theoretically run the same applications. Because obviously Apple has written a lot of code to, for example, make iPad apps not just compatible with Mac, but also for developers to more easily change them so that they basically go from a multi-touch app to a more like indirect input method like cursors. I'm not an absolutist. I don't believe that the iPad should have always stayed what it was, like a completely dumbed down, like only one app on the screen thing like the smartphone is in many ways. But I also don't think it should be like 18 apps simultaneously, 20 background processes at all times, like a powerful laptop. That's at least my opinion. The answer, Apple should, at least to Mark Gurman, I gave you my answer, this is Mark Gurman's. Apple should commit to making the iPad as capable as a laptop, but in the form of a tablet, in a form that tablet users prefer. The Mac should be for consumers who like working on a traditional computer. The iPad should be for people who want the option of a touchscreen. Well, at least he doesn't go like the opposite direction and suggest the Mac to get a touchscreen, because guys, there's no point in the Mac getting a touchscreen. Again, unless they change like MacBooks from the ground up and make them into convertibles, touchscreens are just terrible on laptops. So no. This picture is going to blur a bit more in the coming years because Apple is working to bring touchscreens to the Mac. No, they are not. This is like a rumor that has been popping up for like literally the last decade, and it has never once been true. Maybe Apple is working on a Mac with like a digitizer on the screen for like Apple Pencil support. Maybe like an iMac that would move a little bit like the Surface Studio or whatever. But I don't believe this. This is when Mark Gurman brings up like rumors and shit from like his old reporting, and then just hopes that he can use that to create a narrative regardless of how flimsy that original rumor is or how long it has been debunked. I would be shocked if that actually turns out true. When that happens, choosing between a Mac and iPad will hinge more on whatever you want in an all-in-one device, basically whether you want an all-in-one device or a modular system. Now, I still maintain that the modular system is quite different because it also comes with certain constraints. Like there's no realistic way to put like a fan into the iPad and still make it as thin and light as it is. Apple could, but then it would be a very different product, and then they would also have to rethink, well, do we now give it a larger battery so the chip can actually consume, like not just like burn through battery much quicker because it now has better sustained performance, but now do we give it a larger battery so the iPad doesn't stop being like a 10-hour battery life device? So yeah, he ignores a lot about the actual technical possibilities. This sounds like in my opinion, if like a modular system is probably best in theory, if basically the iPad turns into a Mac whenever you connect it to a keyboard and mouse. That's a nice thought, but it ignores the other constraints of that category. Not to forget that most iPads right now, like even in the lineup, don't even really support Stage Manager, like iPad 9th gen, iPad 10th gen, and iPad mini don't support Stage Manager. iPad mini doesn't even have a way to connect to keyboards, like a hardware way. Like obviously it supports stuff like Bluetooth keyboards. So Apple, those are some of the better selling models. Like the iPad Pro is a more premium iPad. It cannot simply get like every bit of love in the category, and then Apple says like, well, and you guys who are buying like the $450 iPad, well, go F yourself, because we gave the Apple Silicon, the Mac level chip to the iPad Pro. This is what our OS has been optimized for. This is how much RAM it needs. And you can shut it basically. You get like the traditional like iPad constraints. It doesn't quite work that way. Stage Manager by itself was quite a psychological hurdle for many iPad users, because it at that point was exclusive to the iPad Pro, to the latest iPad Pro. So yeah, don't let them tell you that like Apple just has the iPad Pro to sell. They definitely sell a lot of cheap iPads to schools, to like businesses and stuff like that. Now, obviously, those devices at some point will have the same powers, even like an M2 iPad Pro, even with like an A series processor. But then there's still like questions about like bandwidth, support for faster USB-C, charging, Thunderbolt, which also changes the iPad. But again, I'm getting distracted because there's just so much technological detail that Mark Gurman ignores to make this argument. Plus, he relies on rather dubious rumors to even arrive to the question at hand. But yeah, it is what it is. I don't like that. From a business standpoint, there's always been a fear that the iPad will cannibalize Mac sales. That is, by the way, this is not true. Like could iPad cannibalize like MacBook Air sales? Could iPad cannibalize like 14-inch MacBook Pro sales? Yeah, sure. But even once we start hitting like the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and especially once we hit like even any device with M3 Pro, M3 Max chips, right? It's not like the iPad can just magically do what those things do. And even like the biggest potential like 15, 16-inch iPad wouldn't have like a 99 watt-hour battery to actually power those chips for any significant amount of time. And if you want to keep iPad thin and light, then it cannot even contain the power of those chips to begin with. In some ways, iPads already struggle with the M series chips, where I would say that they actually nail the cooling somehow, but the battery life is a little less than one would expect, because Apple wanted to make it a little thinner, a little lighter, and we'll be getting an even thinner device on Tuesday, at least according to rumors. So I don't think there's ever been a fear that the iPad will just cannibalize Mac sales in general, because I believe that any iPad Pro, for example, that cannibalizes MacBook Air sales would also undoubtedly be like with a Magic Keyboard, with an Apple Pencil, with a better screen than the MacBook Air. It would also be like more expensive, so it would be better for Apple to sell you this idea that like, oh, every MacBook user also buys an iPad because of how restricted the iPad is, but they still want like a tablet. That's not really true. Like Apple can just basically compensate for any amount of cannibalization, my opinion, by just making the iPad like maybe a tad bit cheaper, so people upgrade more often, stuff like that. Maybe have like an even more diverse lineup, so people have more to choose from. Basically, there's a lot that they can do. Having a device that cannibalizes your older product at a higher price, Apple likes that. That's what the iPhone did to the iPod. That's what the iPad did to the iPod. That's what AirPods did to like included wired wired earbuds. So yeah, never let yourself be told that Apple like panically fears cannibalization by themselves, because at that point they will just increase the prices on like the iPad. They will like move some of the lineup around. Believe me, they're smart enough to manage competition with themselves. So what if basically the iPad cannibalized the Mac? Neither category is doing that hot right now. That's not even that true. The Mac declined like post-pandemic because every PC manufacturer declined post-pandemic. Sales have now largely stabilized year on year. The last quarter was an uptick. The iPad is down year on year because there hasn't been like new iPads for well over a year. It's not like either category is suffering. The fact that the iPad even generates still like several $billions per quarter, even after not having been updated, says a lot about the staying power of even devices like the 10th gen iPads, in my opinion. Apple should just make the best iPad it can. Well, this is, by the way, interesting. Like, to anybody here who's like a grammar Nazi, can you let me know, do you say like Apple they or Apple it? Because I always say like Apple they, because to me Apple is like a group of people that is Apple, right? If that makes sense. And I don't prefer talking about Apple like its own entity here. But Apple should just make, that was a stupid point. Apple should just make the best iPad it can while also making the best Mac it can. Oh my God, Mark Gurman, thank you so much. This is so brilliantly insightful. The days of purposely holding back the iPad need to end. Apple has a chance to kick off a new era for the iPad. This is weird because you supposedly have like all the leaks and rumors, not just for like I guess iOS 17.5, which would launch with the new iPad officially, but also what will be coming in iOS 18 at WWDC, which is now just a month away, a month and a week. Like, is it really that hard for you to say like, and Apple will use that chance or Apple won't use that chance? Because this is what I would write, because I obviously don't have insider information, and I don't get why Mark Gurman writes like I would. So they can kick off a new era for iPad at the Let Loose event on Tuesday. So please tune in. I'll be there. It's 4 p.m. time in Germany, so I actually had to like move some stuff around, but I'll be there, and I'll probably be starting around half an hour before that. And guys, everybody who's live watching, please let me know what you think of the stream. Let me know what you think of the content in general. Please, if you're enjoying it, like, subscribe, share. And if you want to support this channel directly, you can send a super chat or a super sticker while I'm live. Or if you want to support this channel directly on a regular basis, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel. All support is greatly appreciated, but obviously finances are fun, just to put it mildly. So the presentation, which is expected to be about 35 minutes, so this is when we get to some like leak stuff, I guess. I don't know if he's like purely speculating based on stuff like the Scary Fast event from last Halloween, but where we got like the M1, M1 Pro, M1 Max devices, or if he specifically knows how long it's going to be. For one, I think that's a good length for an iPad-only event, and specifically given some other stuff that will come up as we read. I wish it was 2 hours, but we are getting another 2-hour Apple event as early as June, so there isn't that much to complain about. Should set the product on a new path. It's also an opportunity to clean up the confusing iPad lineup. I mean, he says that, but then he also later brings up points where the iPad lineup will basically stay the same. So why is he doing this speculating stuff if he supposedly have the sauce? Give us the sauce, Mark Gurman. I want the sauce. So he's saying there are currently 5 different iPad models, and this is where we'll also get like in basically his expectations. and what the lineup will look like directly after Tuesday. So first, let's start with what he believes will fixing the situation. Starts with making the high-end iPad range look more like their Mac counterparts. So basically his idea of making it more look like the Macs is primarily about both iPad Pro and iPad Air now having larger models. iPad Pro obviously has had a larger model since 2015, and iPad Air for now has been limited to 10.9 inches. So we would be getting a 10.9 inch iPad Air and a 12.9 inch iPad Air, and we would be getting an 11.1 inch iPad Pro and a 12.9 to 13.1 inch iPad Pro. It's honestly been a roller coaster on those 0.2 inches for the larger iPad Pro. We've had I believe Ross Young basically committed to 12.9, so that probably leaves us with slimmer bezels, which given that that new iPad probably won't be compatible with the old Magic Keyboard, probably doesn't change anything. But yeah, it would be interesting because the smaller iPad Pro is getting 0.1, 0.2 inches larger, and the larger iPad Pro is not changing. So maybe Apple thought that the smaller iPad could use a little bit more screen real estate. Maybe they're just also using a small size increase on the 11-inch iPad Pro to further differentiate it from the 10.9-inch iPad Air. Again, it's all speculation. Obviously, I cannot know Apple's motives. I think that the size differences on the 11-inch devices are stupid. I think they should have always been 11 inches, basically. We don't need 10.9 inches on the iPad Air. The iPad Air should be a proud full 11 inches, and then the iPad Pro smaller one could get upgraded to 11.2, 11.3. This playing with 1/10 of an inch always looks weird to me. This is why I have respect for the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, basically keeping the same screen size since 2015. This is also a little better for app compatibility, so I have really no idea why Apple does those stupid small tricks with the display size. As of next week, the iPad Air will match the MacBook Air and gain a second screen size. Again, that's all fine and good. Now, this is in my opinion basically a last minute leak in that regard. Mark Gurman basically sort of doubles down that the new iPad Pro would be powered by an M4 chip. Now, in previous reporting, he has said that it seems very likely to him that the iPad Pro would basically be skipping the M3 that we know from the current MacBook Air and MacBook Pro models, and moving straight away to an M4 chip that gives us much more advanced, newer artificial intelligence features. The iPad Air, in contrast, just gets upgraded from M1 to M2, which means it's probably not it's gaining all the performance benefits that we know, 15 to 20% more CPU performance, 25 to 30% more GPU performance. Not crazy stuff, but definitely stuff worthwhile stuff. I don't know if that means that the iPad Air will launch and then immediately be exempted basically from supporting most new AI features. Now, I believe that a lot of AI features will come to older Apple chips. I do believe that as far back as A14 and maybe M1, they will be getting some new AI features in iOS 18. But I do believe that a lot of it will be locked to A17 Pro, to a degree M3, but M3 might be worse supported even than A17 Pro, and then M4. And basically M4 and then A18 will be the chips that for this year get all the crazy AI features. Probably next year also nothing exclusive to A19 or M5, and then maybe by the time WWDC 2026 rolls around, this is when new AI features are even more exclusive, and then M2, M3 basically get nothing. A4, A15, A16 get nothing of the new stuff. This is how I expect it to happen. I have never known Apple to completely get rid of like if it's a suite of basically features. I've never seen Apple like fully lock it away from slightly older hardware, especially if the gains between generations weren't that huge. Like, people complained about Stage Manager, for example, being like M1 iPad Pro exclusive, but Stage Manager was like one feature, right? AI in of itself is promising to be like a feature suite of a lot of different stuff. So I don't know. Maybe Apple will just say, well, any device with less than 8 gigs of RAM is just not good enough and stuff like that. We need like all the bandwidth we can have for those features. We want to only put them on the most efficient processors. It's up to them. I think it would be a little silly to be that exclusionary, but maybe if the features are actually come out and they're super impressive, and it's very clear that they're really taking advantage of those latest chips, and maybe on that older chip they would be suddenly 2 times slower, consume more battery life, right? I could see that being still like an argument they make. So what does Mark Gurman believe that the iPad lineup will look like after that, which he calls confusing? I don't think this actually clears anything up that much, but okay. So we would be keeping the 9th gen iPad with a 10.2 inch screen. That's like the Lightning iPad at $330, primarily designed to be like sold to kids and like education related stuff, where it then gets sold for $300. Then here's the $450 10th generation iPad that is like a dumbed down iPad Air, replacing like M1 with A14, has less memory, doesn't support Stage Manager, stuff like that. But it is like the larger screen, cheaper iPad. I don't know, like, I hope that if the iPad Air gets like 128 gigabytes of storage, maybe that at least pushes down the 10th gen iPad's price, because I don't see Apple like doubling storage for it. But who knows? Apple can be surprising in that way. The iPad mini, currently running on an A15 chip, comes with an 8.3 inch screen. That supposedly is not getting updated tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. So I know that front page text John Prosser will be very disappointed by that, because the iPad mini is his favorite little thing in the world. So that's interesting, because obviously we all expect like the changes to iPad mini, to like the cheaper iPads, to be even less substantial than to the iPad Air, right? Supposedly just getting a newer processor. But again, it's up to Apple basically to say what do their logistics look like. Do they believe they still have to sell out of inventory for any of those products before they present a new generation? Basically a lot of company thinking. iPad Air, now 11 and 12.9 inch models. Again, 11 or 10.9 inches, don't know. Just as I don't know if like iPad Pro is like 11 or 11.1 inch iPad screen. But we'll talk about the screens more. So iPad Air M2, iPad Pro M4. He also believes that over time, basically, the lineup will be fully upgraded by next year. So I assume that by the end of this year, maybe like early next year, but that would be very weird. So the 9th gen iPad will be gone. That's the cheap 10.2 inch iPad, replaced by a cheaper 10.9 inch model. I almost wonder if like this basically gets like minimal internal changes. Maybe keeps the same A14 chip, maybe gets like an A15 at best or whatever, and then it just gets like a price cut by 10%, and it's then $399, and Apple is like, look, there's only one iPad. We call it iPad 11th gen. It's $400 for 64 gigabytes. it's $550 for 256 gigabytes, which is $50 less expensive across the board than the 10th gen iPad. It is more expensive than the 9th gen iPad, but it's far more capable, it's far more modern, it looks better, it will last you longer, blah blah blah, right? It has a larger screen, whatever. I could see that argument, and maybe for like educational institutions, you can buy it for like $369, $359, maybe even as low as $349 if Apple really feels like they need to replace more the 9th gen iPad than upgrade the 10th gen. That's speculation, but who knows. The iPad mini will have a faster chip. That chip is largely rumored to be the A17 Pro, or to be more precise, the A17. We don't know if it being a Pro chip. The Pro comes with 8 gigs of RAM. Maybe Apple would skimp on that a little. Maybe they would like disable one GPU core or something like that. But yeah, I do believe that the iPad mini by the end of the year gets A17. If it had been updated, if Apple planned to update it with A16, I believe they kind of would have done it by now. I also don't see a point in really creating like any kind of upgrade where it's like A15 to A16. That makes sense for an iPhone that gets upgraded every year, and then you can also leverage like the new image signal processor. The iPad does not need any of the side stuff of the A16, so it would just be basically like 5 to 10% faster versus the A15 and consumed about the same amount of power. That's not exciting. The iPad mini would get like a fix for its jelly scrolling issue, in my opinion, and an A17 chip. That's it. And I would suspect it probably gets like 128 gigabytes of base storage at its $500 starting price, hopefully in line with the iPad Air, also not starting at 64 gigabytes anymore and instead at 128. Altogether, Apple will have its least cluttered iPad lineup in years. So his least cluttered argument is basically the removal of this and the cheapening of this. Everything about this stays as cohesive as it currently is, right? And in fact, you could argue that the removal of the cheapest iPad is basically compensated by the introduction of a new iPad Air size. So I don't even think that this is a much cleaner lineup. To be honest, I am not one of the people who ever complains about cluttered lineups. I just want the best possible product, or a product that of decent value, and sometimes a cluttered lineup can distract the company itself from creating what I want. But here I would want the iPad Pro. In the worst case, I would want the iPad Air. And if I would want something simple, I would want the iPad mini. And if I would want something for a kid, I would get either one of those, depending a little bit on the age of the kid, the financial capabilities of the household overall, etc. So this does not confuse me. Now, it could confuse other people, but I don't think that that confusion would also prevent them from doing a purchase. So, moreover, the top-end iPads will feel more like computers. The new aluminum Magic Keyboard, we've talked about that in the past, is expected to be more durable with a laptop-like aesthetic. Which is funny, he's talking about an aesthetic, but he doesn't actually like I believe he said that it would get like a larger trackpad, but we don't know. And new software will take advantage of the hardware, which is really interesting because we got like last year Final Cut Pro and Logic on the iPad. Now, those solutions are not quite the same as the solutions on the Mac. So the question is, if Apple like brings a new Xcode to iPad, what does that mean? Is that the fully featured Xcode, or is it only one that's supposed to support Swift and Swift UI? Does it maybe not support like regular C, C++? I don't know, because Mark Gurman, who should be in the know, does not tell me. Give me the sauce, Mark Gurman. As I've written previously, not me, that's Mark, it's also high time for Apple to give the iPad a more intuitive and useful multitasking experience. This is very easy said than done. I highly recommend you guys use like Samsung DeX in like tablet mode, and then tell me that it's better than Stage Manager, right? I understand it works well if you connect it to like an external screen, or if you use it with keyboard and mouse. Just try using like the multitasking built into Android and stuff like that. on a purely touchscreen basis. Like this idea that Apple should magically come up with something new and more intuitive, yes, that's a very like typical expectation that consumers have of Apple, but as great as Apple is not magic. And this is how I sometimes like, because he's basically also not saying like, oh, does he mean like one that would still be focused on multi-touch, or is he saying maybe one that's specifically optimized for this like new and better aluminum keyboard, whatever it could bring to the iPad? I do assume though, like every like bigger multitasking change would go back to devices like M1 iPad Pro. Like that device is not even 3 years old. It cannot be excluded, in my opinion, from this. And I don't say that just because I own one. I think legitimately with 8 or even 16 gigabytes of memory and one processor, like decent memory bandwidth, it really should be supported in that regard. Though then the question comes up, what will be the battery penalty be? But that's up for consumers to decide, right? They can choose to enable that or not. If the company can pull it off, combined with the new hardware and the focus on AI, which will be our next topic and our last topic for today, Apple could once again make the iPad feel like the future. So a very weird write-up. I honestly feel like he basically had nothing more to say. Like, he already published a thing on Friday, which I missed, which is basically just a summary of all the rumors. Now, obviously, I will not be today dissecting stuff like, oh, the iPad Pro gets like a double layer OLED screen. I've talked about that in the past. I will not be talking about Apple Pencil 3 supporting Apple Vision Pro, because it's all basically public domain knowledge at this point. 1 billion leakers have talked about all that stuff and YouTubers, but it is interesting to me that Mark Gurman chose like this basically format for this, not the Power On newsletter format, but like this like criticizing, basically saying, oh well, this is Apple's chance to turn it around, which like the iPad Pro will sell better this year than it sold last year, so will the iPad Air, simply from the fact that those are newer iPads. Software will not hold them back any more than it did last year or the year prior. This disillusionment of supposed pros with the iPad is not shared by the larger community. The iPad still sells more units than Macs. It's just that Macs have a higher average sales price, and this is why the revenue coming from the Mac segment usually is higher. Even then, not always. So yeah, this idea that the iPad just needs to turn into a Mac is a little weird, but it's interesting that he still holds on to the idea that it would be powered by M4. I don't know. I have speculated that is it possible, right? Is M3E production ready enough to create one Apple Silicon chip for basically 2 iPad Pro models, right, 11 and 13 inches? Yes, absolutely. And this is like the smallest Apple Silicon chip in terms of like Mac processors. It's the smallest M series Apple chip. So the yields on it would probably be pretty great, especially since M3E is rumored to have better yields than M3B, which is what the M3 processor is built on. It would be quite a nice like surprise. Like you would basically be saying OLED, ProMotion, XDR, M4, best 5G modem, Wi-Fi 6E or even Wi-Fi 7, right? Everything that you need. You can always go maybe a little higher or whatever. Like if it still keeps like Wi-Fi 6, maybe you could argue, well, by this time maybe it could have gotten Wi-Fi 7. Does it really matter to most people on an iPad, right? But here it's like, oh, it doesn't even get like the M3, which is like half a year old at this point, which most people would be plenty happy with. This is what happened with my M1 iPad Pro, right? It was at that point 6 months old or whatever, and I was still happy to get that chip, even though I knew that M2 probably isn't too far off. but it turned out to be further off than many expected. So yeah, I don't want to belabor that point, but I think M4 is exciting overall. I don't think it's necessarily needed to get people excited for the iPad Pro, but I still think it's a good thing to have. And then there's the question of, with all those other improvements, right? Like a new Magic Keyboard, OLED screens, a new design where the iPad is now like 5 millimeters thick and stuff like that. Hopefully that doesn't come with a big durability issues. What happens with M4? What could it support? And this is where we get to iOS 18 and rumored AI features. Now, this will not be a detailed breakdown because obviously we still have WWDC coming up next month. I expect for there to be a lot more leaks and rumors in between. So we'll have quite a nice comparison between like what we expected to what came true to how much does even like iOS 18 develop as a beta. What does that mean for like their large language models? Does it get significantly better between June and September and stuff like that? So iOS 18 basically is rumored to largely be the biggest iOS update ever. This is, for example, according to Mark Gurman, there will be not huge redesigns supposedly for the entire OS, but some individual apps will be changed and the entire OS will get a slightly fresher feel with like more customization options for the home screen, for example. We don't know too many details about it, but maybe we'll get some new icons or whatever, but yeah, very little in that regard has been confirmed, if of course you can call any leak or rumor a confirmation. But what we largely believe will be the focus of iOS 18 is its focus on AI. Now, obviously, it would be powered by a large language model. People have called it Apple GPT because obviously ChatGPT is the most prominent example of like LLM-based AIs out there. The project is called Ajax internally at Apple. They've been working on it from like 2022, which isn't that much time. But if they can also take a lot of like open source projects these days that are pretty advanced, pay like minimal like licensing fees to them and use that to improve that. They can purchase data, so they don't even have to collect data from customers necessarily. But basically this will be the basis for what powers iOS 18 smarts. And it starts with a new version of Siri that would be more intelligent based on the large language model tech. This is actually interesting because we don't know like what extra capabilities would Siri exactly get. I assume it would pretty well integrate with the other rumored AI features, but part of it would be just Siri's ability to better understand you, right? Your natural language. Maybe Siri gets even faster. Siri already like recognizes your voice offline, and this is also part of Apple's AI push, supposedly, that they will laud their security and privacy benefits by having most of their AI features run locally. Tim alluded to some of that during their financial earnings call, so maybe, now he obviously didn't say it directly, but he said that Apple would have some unique takes on AI to show off in the next couple of weeks. But I assume that Siri would, of course, also get like more capabilities in more like to like Wolfram Alpha, obviously like ChatGPT, Google Gemini, where it works maybe a little bit more like a search engine. In that regard, actually, like we just got on May 3rd some new stuff from Apple Insider, right? Safari will gain a text summarization tool called Intelligent Browsing. It will allow users to generate a short summary of any web page, and Siri could gain a similar feature that works in the Messages app. So you could see how many of the features are actually difficult to isolate, because is this a Messages feature? Is this a Siri feature? Is this maybe a system-wide feature because it also works in like Safari? So a lot of AI stuff, a lot of like integration between like the main OS, the individual apps and services, and of course the hardware where Apple would make most of the LLM basically run on the neural engine baked into like an A17 Pro, an M4 chip, or whatever chip might get any exclusive AI stuff. And there is also rumored improvements to Spotlight search. It will have more intelligent results. Again, this is also like the question, is this like a Spotlight search feature, or is this like a Siri feature? Because what if I tell Siri to look for something? Will it give me the same results as Spotlight search? Will it give me slightly different results than Spotlight search, right? Will Siri try to focus more on giving me like a verbose like answer that explains the situation, maybe like I ask about a historic event or something, but while Spotlight search focuses more on like a visual representation of that answer? I have no idea. Spotlight search would also get improved sorting, which is always appreciated. I do believe that Spotlight search on iOS is absolutely incredible. It's well integrated in the OS. It's pretty fast. Android for years tried to mimic it. I believe they are now finally sort of close, but then of course they also get to combine their system-wide search with Google search, which does give them some other benefits. But yeah, so Spotlight search would be able to search inside stuff like contacts and calendars. As for calendars, we just heard rumors basically that calendars would now be integrated with reminders. Whether or not that means it has any extra AI smarts, maybe it looks through your emails or through all your apps, maybe Siri more intelligently suggests events for you. Again, we don't know, but we do hear about it now and then, right? So music would be able to automatically generate playlists for you. Maybe that would be also like a response by Apple to the supposed superiority of Spotify when it comes to playlists. Pages, Keynote, and Numbers would get summarization features, but also content creation features. Now, Tim Cook did specifically mention like AI and Gen AI, generative artificial intelligence. So in my opinion, it kind of would be weird if like in 2024 Apple didn't let you like at least vaguely give you like, oh, do you want me to finish this text for you or whatever, right? Now, I don't know if that will be competitive with what like ChatGPT does and the way like Copilot integrates into Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, but especially if Apple manages to make most of this run locally, that would be a big undertaking. And like running obviously locally means you are running a much smaller language model, so would that make it substantially worse? Again, as with many of those other AI features, I don't know. AI features for Xcode are pretty self-explanatory actually, because we have seen some AI integration into other development tools from like Microsoft and Google. It would be able to auto-complete blocks of code, help with testing applications, and more. I obviously believe that it would be probably more tuned for like Swift and Swift UI, but let's see. Maybe Apple still hangs on to like supporting C++ more. That is pretty self-explanatory to me. Spotlight search would integrate, as we said, Gen AI and can perform more complex tasks again, which is like, and then on top of that, we now have rumors about it having superior sorting and stuff like that. It's always hard to isolate software features in that way, especially if like any leaker does not actually have a lot of hands-on time. A lot of the time, like the tech press works best because the tech companies actually explain to them in a lot of detail how features work, right? If they were to only look at the feature and like play around with it for 5 minutes, maybe with like some kind of leaked device or like leaked version of the OS, it stands to reason that they wouldn't even be fully grasping all the benefits right away. I certainly wouldn't be able to. And unless you're also like a programmer who then gets deep into the actual code, well, this is where a lot of stuff can then get lost in translation. And obviously you might have like an older beta, so you might even not know precisely what Apple's current stand is, how far advanced certain features are or not. So there's a lot to consider here. One thing mildly interesting, an AI-powered wellness coaching feature would be integrated into Apple Health and Apple Watch. We've already talked about messages getting summarization features that builds on top what I said, that messages would be able to autocomplete messages and answer questions. That to me is also what I expect, like basically in Pages, Keynote, and Numbers. And I also would expect the same thing for email. I don't know why it would be like, to be honest, I kind of expect this to be like a system-wide feature, but tuned maybe for individual apps. What I would expect is, like, if you have an autocomplete and like answer a feature in Messages, that feature basically works on like a more like, like your regular language, right? Like a little bit more relaxed stuff. And then it gets a little more formal if you try doing something in Pages or Keynote. And then in Numbers, I would expect you be able to tell Siri to summarize for me this in the chart, and then it creates maybe like a number sheet for you, and then you translate that to an Excel sheet. This is kind of how I expect that to work. Again, no idea how like the on-device stuff would limit any of this. We have had discussions about the idea that Apple would work with Google's Gemini or OpenAI's ChatGPT. I don't know what that means, if they like license the models themselves, if it's maybe only for the stuff that actually is like very web dependent. Maybe some of the stuff gets like so complicated that like the local language model just tells you, I'll be moving you to the cloud, please wait a second for the feature to like activate. I don't know, like I mean, Siri has like stuff that works on a device, right? You can turn off all internet settings, right? And then you can still tell Siri to like turn on an alarm, for example. Maybe it could be similar to that, where Apple says like, well, some stuff works completely on device, some stuff works on device but requires the web to basically fetch data, and some stuff requires our partners at Google or at OpenAI have like a larger language model, have like a lot of like server space with NVIDIA H100s or whatever, and we are leveraging them for you to get even more advanced AI and stuff like that. I have no idea. We have talked about active negotiations here. It has been sort of a rumor up and down for like the last month or so, even that Apple could be working with like Chinese Weibo company. I don't know. Like, I'll be 100% honest. I have speculated that this would be more for the like search backend, because obviously if they work with Microsoft, who basically controls a lot of OpenAI, then they could like work with Bing as a search engine, right? And if they also like work with Google, then of course they already have a long-standing partnership with Google Search on many different stuff, on a lot of different stuff. So I don't know what that would mean, to be perfectly honest. If it's more about the language models, if it's more about the search, how much would be outsourced, how much will be running locally. Apple themselves have already like published some of their AI stuff, some of their LLMs, and even how they even published like I believe it would be called like a white paper on how to keep those small and basically running on device. They've also had some like Gen AI features for even like image stuff, so maybe that would come to the Photos app. It hasn't been rumored thus far. Maybe it's a feature not ready for AI for iOS 18, but yeah, so again, and then there's like all the Safari stuff with like summarization, web eraser. With AI summarization now, we have started getting like browsers specifically focused on like summarizing web pages. I personally have not and search entries. I have not found it to be very useful. I don't know how much better Apple's tool will be, how much faster it will be, what the interface will will be, if it will be a lot very superior to what we have thus far. But there's a lot of interesting stuff. I definitely believe that iOS 18 probably would deserve like to be called the biggest iOS update ever, and probably definitely since iOS 7. But as you can see, there's a lot. Now, I don't actually expect a lot of AI stuff to pop up on Tuesday. I do expect some of it because let me be perfectly clear. If the iPad Pro is built on M4, I would expect at least one of those features to be shown off. Maybe it wouldn't be available at launch. Maybe it like launches maybe just in September, right, with iPad OS 18 or whatever, or maybe it launches like simultaneously with WWDC, right? Like WWDC shows off a feature for iOS 8, features for iOS 18, but then we also get like iOS 17.6 simultaneously that brings up one new feature to like M4 and A17 Pro devices or whatever. So there's a lot of different stuff that could happen here, and I definitely am excited, but as you can see, it's a lot, right? It's different features baked throughout, OS features and already existing applications. It's the big question on what runs locally and when it runs locally on which hardware and what gets outsourced, and if it gets outsourced, does it get outsourced specifically for like search engine stuff or more for the large language models by Google's Gemini or OpenAI's ChatGPT. And then with the iPad itself, there are also still questions like, is it actually M4 versus M3? What about the pricing, right? Is it a $1,700 device? Is it a $1,500 device? Is it a $1,300 device? All of those prices, by the way, are possible because we don't fully know just how expensive that OLED panel is. Maybe Apple would use like the existence of the M4 to also push for the iPad Pro to seem even more premium than previous iPads, saying, oh, it has a chip that not even any Mac currently has and stuff like that. So there's a lot, and we've gone through the lineup. I probably won't be streaming tomorrow. I have quite a busy day, but I will let you guys know on Twitter if I get my I don't know if I should keep it a surprise. So no, I'll take it back. I don't know if I will tell you guys tomorrow if I got my my silver play button, but definitely on Tuesday. If it's there, you will see it on Tuesday. If it's not there by Tuesday, then you will see it whenever it's there. At that point, I won't hide it. So let's see if I can keep a surprise, if I even want to keep it as a surprise. I probably won't make like a big unboxing video about it if it comes on Tuesday, and if it comes tomorrow, it depends a little bit how early I get done with my stuff. So a lot of stuff to consider, a lot of stuff to think about, and a lot of things to get excited about. And big thank you to anybody who stuck with me there. I know it's a little bit longer of a stream than I usually do at this time. Usually if I do like a 1.5 hour stream, I put it a little earlier in the day. I know that's a lot better with my demographics, but that's when I got finished for today. So thank you so much. Again, this channel has grown and grown. We're at 102,000 subscribers. I still try to encourage more and more guys to watch us live instead of watching us in post, but as I say, all support is appreciated. And speaking of support, please comment, please subscribe, please like, please share, and if you want to support me directly and to catch me live, leave a super chat or a super sticker. And if you feel like supporting me long term, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel. I will let you as always know if there's like a surprise stream tomorrow, but you can definitely expect for me to go live about half an hour before Apple's event on Tuesday, and then stay on for at least half an hour after that. So that will be quite a meaty, substantial live stream. I'll be making like some last minute predictions. Maybe I'll bet on something there. and stuff like that. So I not on money, just on honor, basically. And it's not even smart on YouTube to do any bets, because that's terrible for like the monetization of videos. So yeah, I've blabbered on and on. I need to eat something now because I'm starving. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Please let me know what beyond the Apple events you would like to see me cover, or if you have any constructive criticism, that's of course always appreciated as well. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you next time, and I'll let you know when that next time actually is. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.